In 2001, the first live-action Lord of the Rings movie was released, along with the first Harry Potter movie. This brought a reemergence of the fantasy genre, something that had been tried and failed in the past numerous times. In the past, Lord of the Rings had a couple adaptations, and at the same time, J.R.R. Tolkien's friend C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia got its own few adaptations here and there. So it makes sense when The Lord of the Rings was so successful that Walden Media decided to take the spiritual companion to that, the Chronicles of Narnia, and make its own larger budget version of that book series. I remember it being a big deal at the time. It was a huge box office success, driven by religious groups who would bus all kinds of kids to the nearest theater. That was my experience anyway. But all this time later, does the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, still hold up?
I knew nothing about the Narnia franchise before this movie came out, but it was well known that the series was not nearly as big as The Lord of the Rings, even before the movies came out, so it only made sense that while Disney wanted to profit off of the fantasy hype, the movie itself wasn't going to be as big of a deal as Fellowship, or Two Towers, or Return of the King. In fact, before the sequels came out, a lot of people didn't even seem to realize there were other books besides The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which didn't have a cliffhanger and was very much built like a single children's fantasy. In fact, it was the first book C.S. Lewis wrote for Narnia, before the sequels or prequels came about, and critically, the consensus points at the original novel being considered the best of them all. For years, this was the only book that was really being adapted. There was the TV miniseries done in 1967, a 1979 feature-length film directed by Bill Melendez, who did all those Charlie Brown specials, and here he's obviously working with the same kind of budget, and in the late 80s there was a BBC TV series that was probably the most well-known adaptation until the 2005 movie came out. So like Lord of the Rings, it never really got its shining moment on the silver screen. Cut to 2005, and Andrew Adamson, one of the directors of Shrek, would bring this movie to the big screen in a live-action form with an effects budget and filmed on an epic scale. This was probably everything fans were hoping for, paying respect to the original creation and filling the movie with details from the Narnia world. Since other fantasy movies were doing well financially, it proved that Narnia could benefit from a longer movie and a larger budget. The story of the Pevensies' journey to the magical world of Narnia has all the classic attributes of fantasy lore, as they retreat into a wardrobe which happens to be the entrance to the wintry giant place. There's fauns, talking lions, an evil witch played spectacularly by Tilda Swinton. There's talking beavers, centaurs, unicorns, and fighting gorillas, a dog. Some of the so-called magical creatures are a bit of a stretch, but it's a world of make-believe, so who am I to argue? If this movie can have a gorilla, I can understand why the 1979 version has a duck warrior. The main characters all have distinct personalities. Peter, who's coming into his own as a leader, just shy of the age requirement needed for real-life wars since this movie actually takes place during World War II. Lucy, such an innocent character whose interactions with Mr. Tumnus could fall apart if any kind of creep factor occurred, but James McAvoy is perfect as always, and works well with Lucy. Edmund seems like a character that's extremely tough to pull off, since he's meant to portray the others, have selfish but understandable feelings, and be an all-around moody guy. Yet the writing actually manages to make his arc identifiable and leads to a satisfying redemption. And there's Susan. I don't really have much to say about her, honestly. Maybe it's attributed to the source material, but I've never actually gotten to reading them myself. Even then, I did hear that one of the books writes her out completely, describing her later life as someone who liked nylons and lipstick. Typical cliche women stuff, so maybe she just never got enough development. And in the movie, it's the same issue, despite the actress doing a good job. In fact, all the actors are great for being unknowns. This movie tells the story at a grand pace, feeling like an epic, but also making it just as entertaining as any kind of children's movie. I'm glad Disney got the rights to make these, but didn't make it cheesy or dumb things down. They let it be a straightforward adaptation with effects, wizardry, and dialogue. For being a 2.5-hour movie, it never becomes boring, albeit a bit long during the finale. The effects work has aged well. There's a lot of computer to be found here for sure, but a lot of the sets look great, even if you can tell that it's taking place inside of a studio building. But I'll take this over green screens any day. Hey Disney, if you want some hints on how to do expressions well on the CG lion, Aslan is the proof. Backed by the commanding presence of Liam Neeson's voice, it's startling just how expressive the King of Narnia can be when you compare him to that other recent Lion King. And what's more is that a lot of the characters are done practically with makeup and good costumes, stuff like Mr. Tumnus. This is stuff that still holds up 14 years later. The CGI is good too and only utilized when needed. Obviously, I didn't need to see a man in a costume trying to play a beaver. It's something that should be done in the computer, and it's done good. No matter how enjoyable this can be, I do still find it to be your typical fantasy film. It does everything pretty much right, but it doesn't do anything you haven't seen before. It's shot well, edited well, but nothing really stands out in particular. And it's funny that there's a few key moments that felt a little off to me, most notably the return of Aslan and the witch's death, both of which feel pretty rushed and unfocused. It's funny because I did check out the 1979 version, and the animation is of course sloppy and cheap, but it does do a few things better than the 2005 live-action film, in my opinion. It shortens the battle by a lot, which I think was great, and actually plays out Aslan's return a lot better, even letting the characters just breathe and enjoy the moment, even if the scene is a bit silly in itself. And just look how the queen is killed in this version. One of the top 10 best villain death scenes. So if you've never seen the animated version, don't completely write it off. It's a happy amount of 70s animation cheese. And also, the 2005 movie still works. It's an adventurous kids movie that brings just as much entertainment to the adults. It's just too bad that they never kept the series going after this. They did Prince Caspian and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, but The Silver Chair, which was planned, recently got cancelled in favor of a new Netflix version. I'm excited that they'll finally probably finish the series, maybe even touch upon the horse and his boy and the magician's nephew. Hell, throughout all the incarnations, they still haven't done the last battle. I guess the series maybe would have done better had they made the sequels back to back, much like the Harry Potter franchise, and to keep up with the children's ages. But even then, those other books just are less known, and I've heard none of them are quite as good as the original one, so it's probably tough to do a good adaptation that people will have knowledge about. In any case, I enjoy this story. I've liked the different interpretations, and I look forward to seeing more in the future. Thanks to Lucas for this Patreon request, and thanks to all my Patreon supporters. For only $7, you can get your own monthly movie review. Ask me to review anything I haven't already. There's also other perks like blogs, exclusive videos, and early access. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And thanks so much for watching this video.